Okay, I think we can get started. I'd like to welcome everyone to our webinar on sponsor billing and collections. Looks like a few more people are still joining. We appreciate everyone being here this morning virtually, especially in this crazy weather we had this morning with the storm. It looks like a good amount of people are still able to join, which is great. So hopefully the rest are all safe and sound and not too many people lost their power today. My name is Christy Tomaszewski. I am a customer service accountant in sponsor programs. I'm going to be joined today by James and Stacy. James Craven is my coworker. He has my same role, a customer service accountant in sponsor programs as well. And Stacy Orban is the accounts receivable supervisor of sponsored research over at SSC at Shared Service Center. They'll be talking in a little bit. This is a reminder to please use the chat feature if you have any questions or comments. We're going to hold all of those until the end after we've all done our slides, and then we can have time to discuss anything at the end. So today's discussion is going to include a few things. First, we're going to talk about sponsored programs, SP's roles and responsibilities, what we do in our office. Then we're going to talk about award setup, what we look for when we're setting up a brand new award after ORSP has signed off on it. We're going to touch on some invoicing types since there are many. Then Stacy's going to talk about AR's roles and responsibility, what her office does. And she will touch on the collections process and also unit responsibilities and how you can help monitor your receivables. And then lastly, we're going to go through some of the systems that are available to you out there for looking at invoices, invoice detail, and also for monitoring receivables. So just to give you a little overview of sponsor programs oversees and manages the financial post-award activities of U of M's research enterprise and other sponsored activities to make sure that we're compliant with federal, state, and local laws, in addition to any sponsor regulations that the sponsor may have. So we're mostly the post-award office. For a visual on the sponsor programs area, we have a chart here that shows the 3 different areas of sponsor programs, because sometimes people get confused of who does what in sponsor programs. The first area is reporting. They review and reconcile uniform guidance issues. So you've likely come across the reporting accountants when they send you a UG report, either annual or final, on your federal projects. It'll list the UG expenses that need to be resolved, so they'll help you with that. They also send out FSRs to you to review for your project. Once the numbers are finalized and you agree on everything, then the reporting accountant is able to submit financial reports to the sponsor if they're required for that particular project. The reporting also sends final invoices to SSC so that they can get submitted to the sponsor if the contract requires that. And they facilitate project closeout. Customer service, where James and I are from, we act as the main contact area for post-award administration. So we do project and grant establishments, we set up projects, we get the modifications if anything changes on the project. We make sure that the invoicing is compliant with what's stated in the agreement. And then after we look at the agreement and all the invoicing terms, we inform SSC on how a project is to be invoiced. We work on and look at transaction approvals, which could include journal entries, vouchers, PARs, budget reallocations. We do compliance, which often includes audit work. And then we do provide unit training when that's necessary or requested. The last area of sponsor programs is Office of Contract Administration, OCA. You've come across them when you have a project that is giving money to another university, for example, and we need to set up a sub-award. OCA is responsible for the review and execution of contracts and grants associated with sponsor projects, and then they prep and they do the administration of outgoing sub-awards and hybrid POs. That's just a little overview of the areas of sponsor programs. In particular, what does customer service do? We have an award processing phase where we set up the project initially after ORSP reviews and reads the contract and makes any changes and signs off on it and everything's good. It comes to us in ERPM to process and set up into our system. So we review award terms and conditions and look at all the invoicing details and make sure we have a good understanding of how the award should be set up and what the sponsor is expecting. And then we will inform SSC and Stacy's team on how to bill the sponsor to make sure that the invoices are submitted to the agreement and how we agreed on everything. The rest of customer service roles are post-award. That takes up a lot of our space. So we support post-award billing issues that could arise throughout the life of the project. If there's any kind of billing issues, if there's a PO change or there's a change to how the sponsor wants invoicing done, if they want it sent to a different place, we're the ones that initiate that and make sure that SSC is aware of that change. If there's any disputed expenses by the sponsor, something they're not going to pay, we're kind of the middleman and we help facilitate the solution to that. We work with the department and SSC to make sure we can get that resolved. We coordinate financial activities related to project management, including transaction approval, which, like I mentioned before, are the PARs, voucher approvals, journal entries, budget reallocations. We serve as an expert resource to the university community in regards to any of the award requirements or sponsor-specific requirements and university compliance issues such as UG. We provide department training on business processes that are related to sponsor projects. And then we provide support to departments and answer questions if they have unique situations or something they haven't come across. We're usually the first contact person for that. Next, I'm going to hand it over to James, who's going to talk about what it looks like when we set up a brand new award.
So when we are setting up a new award, we have a couple of questions that we ask when we're setting up the invoicing requirements. So the first one is, do we need invoices? Some projects we have where the sponsor is going to pay us a set amount each year, each quarter, something like that, and we don't actually require invoices for those projects. Other projects, we do require invoices. The next question we ask is, how often are the invoices required? This can be monthly, quarterly, semi-annually, annually, or at specified dates set within the notice of award. The university prefers to send out invoices monthly whenever possible, but obviously not every award allows us to invoice monthly. The next question is, how are they going to be submitted? So this is either we send a physical mailed invoice through the post office, we can email it to a contact, or we can submit it in a sponsor system. The university prefers either of the last two options, either email or a sponsor system. They're usually a little bit quicker. We get our money a little bit faster. So if you ever get an award and you notice that somebody contacts you and says, please send emails to us with the invoices, please forward that to sponsored programs and we'll get a mod settled on that. The next is, are we invoicing based on actual expenses or set amounts? This is usually in the notice of award. They'll say, please invoice for X amount per month, or please invoice on actual expenses incurred. And then we also have to figure out what kind of invoice are we sending. Is it a federal contract or a federal grant? This could be a 1034 or a 270. They're just two different government forms. Or are we sending just our standard U of M invoice template? Additionally, on our end, we decide, do we need to add additional information to these invoices? Are there different requirements from the sponsor that require us to send gross pay registers for payroll activity? Do we need to send expense receipts? Do we need to reach out to the department to receive a narrative report to go with each invoice? That is something that happens every once in a while. And then finally, sometimes when a project comes in, it is a milestone project. Those projects require that we invoice based on actual activity done in the department and reaching certain milestones. And when we get those projects, we set up quarterly requirements with SSC to reach out to the department to ask, hey, have we finished any of the milestones? Can we bill for anything? So that's another way that we set things up. So then some of the invoice types that we might send out to a sponsor. So milestone invoices, again, this is something that the department has more control over. When you finish a milestone, you can always reach out to AR and request that they send a invoice now. You don't have to wait for the quarterly email from SSC to request the invoice. You can always say, we're done now, please send it now. We have pay schedule invoices. These are invoices that are set amounts per month or per quarter that we're sending out, not based on expense activity. So you might see that we have more revenue on the project than expenses, or you might have less revenue than expenses. So make sure that you're seeing, is this set amounts that we're billing for? We have cost reimbursable invoices, which are our most common invoices. These are billed usually each month if we can manage that. For actual expenses incurred, this is run through the GL interface called Glint. Glint calculates and produces the invoice based on actual expense activity. Then we have CR manual, which is similar to a cost reimbursable Glint, except we can't use Glint for some reason. Usually this reason is we have to report cost share. We have to report additional department documentation like receipts or the general ledger, or there's a report that needs to go with the invoice. So we can't actually use Glint to automatically send invoices. We also have one-time invoices. These are usually paid up front. They want one invoice just for their documentation, and they'll send us the full amount of the value of the contract. One special type of invoice we have are foreign currency invoices. So these aren't very common, and most projects are denominated in US dollars. The Treasury Office actually has to sign off on any transactions not in US currency. And if we do have a project that is funded in foreign currency, the department takes on all of the currency risk of fluctuations up or down. So what you'll see in the system is that we will produce an invoice on our end. The invoice will be listed in US dollars. And then whenever we are paid, that amount we are paid is then converted from, say, euros back to US dollars. And whatever difference between what we have invoiced for on our end and what we've actually received will come through as an adjustment to your revenue. This can be either up or down. And again, the department is at risk on those transactions. We also have various sponsor invoices. These are usually on Fund 25,000. These are recharge accounts, these types of things. This is a special billing type that not every department sees. These invoices are created specifically at the department's request. There are no invoicing rows. There's no monthly invoices or anything like that. These are purely created at the department's request. Sometimes these can be, very ad hoc and random. And so if you have something like this, please reach out to SSC or to sponsored programs and we can discuss further with these. With that, I will send it. We have one more final. We have the final invoice that we send, right? So these are projects that have ended and you've received the FSR from sponsored programs. You've signed off. All the expenses that are listed in the FSR are correct per our knowledge. These go through sponsored programs. Sponsored programs does a final audit of the project, make sure everything is allowable. And then we actually send the final invoice detail to SSC and then create a special invoice marked final. And once that final invoice is sent, we can usually no longer invoice for anything beyond that. So please make sure that when you're signing off on FSRs that everything is done. You're not expecting anything else to post. Once this is sent, we are done with the project. With that, I will send it over to Stacy and she will talk about her area.
Thank you, James. Let me just see, I'll screen share here. Okay, so I'm also going to start with a quick overview, very high level of our team's primary responsibilities. The accounts receivable sponsored team provides billing and collection services for all research-related activities for both Michigan Medicine and campus. And as James previously stated when going over the invoice types, our billers generate invoices established by intervals, and they ensure that they have the appropriate documentation, all based upon the sponsored agreement. So once that invoice is created and it becomes 30 days past the due date, the sponsored collectors begin actively collecting on the outstanding receivable to ensure that we get timely payment. Our team's also responsible for maintaining customer records and everything within customer records. So that can be the actual physical address of the sponsor, to just even the name of the sponsor. So if any of that information changes, that actually gets routed to my team. We work in partnership with sponsored programs, the customer service team as well, to make sure that they're informed of any of those changes. Okay. So by the numbers, just to put in some context about how much is actually being billed and collected on through the university, I am very proud to say that last year for fiscal year 21, during a pandemic, the total sponsored billings were 475 million, and just over 22,000 invoices were actually invoiced through the shared services. So a lot of other areas saw a decline in transaction due to the pandemic, but I'm happy to report that a majority of the sponsored billing and collections activity remained relatively unaffected. And then once those invoices were sent out the door, like I stated, our collections team begins actively collecting on those once they're 30 days past due. And they successfully collected $449 million and applied that payment to a little over 21,000 invoices. I do like to note too that the remaining balance and the difference between those two wasn't that it was uncollectible. They're still actively collecting on that balance right now. So what does SSE accounts receivable do? So essentially what our team is responsible for is creating invoices and maintaining the information within the ARB module. So Pathways, I'm sure that you're all familiar with. So what Pathways allows our team to do is to actually invoice an external customer. My team is responsible for all these sponsored related invoices, but we do have a sister department, the services team, that also creates invoices for goods and services within the university. It allows us to create that invoice into the system, and it is recognized as a JE, a journal entry, a BI journal entry to the designated chart fields for the associated invoice. So you will see that BI come through as revenue to the chart fields if you're monitoring your SOR. It also creates that item for us to be able to report and track on those. So that's what helps the collections team identify outstanding invoices. It allows senior leadership to understand the overall health of AR, and it allows us to create reports of our aging receivables. So that way we can have a really good understanding of where we are in our current state. So as I stated, we are two separate teams. The SSE AR sponsored team, which I have the privilege of supervising, is comprised of two different areas. The sponsored billing team, their primary functions within their day-to-day are to complete new customer setups. So those are setups that are sent to us from sponsored programs. So essentially we're creating a shell within Pathways that allows us to do all invoicing and payment activity within that shell. They're creating invoices based upon the criteria that was established within the agreements. It also allows us to request, they're also requesting any additional support that might be needed to go along with that invoice per any notes or anything that's been outlined with that customer status that's been sent to us. And we also, as James had mentioned, submit numerous invoices into sponsored portals for processing. So a portal is essentially a tool that different sponsors use that require us outside of the invoice that's created to submit that information into their portal so that way they can pay or process the invoices within their system that they're currently using. Once that invoice, like I stated, is created, the collections team then gets notified by items. Both areas are split by alpha, an alpha split within both teams of the billing and collections team. And this really allows both the billing and collections associates to create a relationship with the sponsors and really understand the unique differences or requirements within those sponsored types. So they are reaching out with any information that they have by telephone or email. It is a frequency of at least once a month that they're contacting our sponsors to inquire about payment. But simultaneously, while they are reaching out by email and telephone, we also have an automated stunning letter system that's being sent to the sponsor to also prompt them for payment. They are documenting all action taken and the response of the sponsor in our collections work center, so that way we can easily understand just what's going on with that outstanding receivable. And if they're made aware of any discrepancies at any point in time, they're going to be reaching out to sponsor programs and the department just to let them know of any potential risk or any partnership that we need to gain to help ensure that the university receives payments. Our sister team, the services team, like I stated, they are primarily responsible for all goods and service activities that are happening within campus, but they also handle the billing activities for all of your various and your CTSU groups. So you might have contact with them for those types of billings, and that would be a different supervisor who's not listed here, but we can get you that information as well, who handles that activity. The services team is also responsible for all payment processing for money that's sent to the shared services, and this happens in a wide variety of different ways. We get checks that come to our lockbox, we get physical checks that are sent to the shared services. We also maintain over 20 different bank accounts that we're receiving payments in and trying to identify the invoices within those payments, but they're also creating journal entries for dollars received that are outside of our AR ledger for payments the university is receiving. At times, we do have delinquencies in our payments. So when this does happen, SSC accounts receivable team is working with the department and the sponsor to try to resolve those. So we're kind of a liaison to try to identify what's the reason for the delinquency and connecting the appropriate people to help get any information that is necessary in order for the sponsor to pay. There is a responsibility of the department, though, to monitor your receivables regularly. James is going to go over a wide variety of different ways that you can see your receivables to see if payment has been applied to any outstanding receivables or to see if they're outstanding still at this time. Ultimately, and this is a very rare scenario that this does happen, but any uncollectible receivables that accounts receivable deems as being uncollectible is the responsibility of the department. So we would actually be reaching out to you and asking for discretionary chart fields to remove the debt from AR and have it be the responsibility of the department at that time. We do have an internal escalation process that I want to go over. So for the first 90 days, we believe that's just regular everyday collection activity. SSC accounts receivable collections team is actively reaching out, trying to make contact with that sponsor. And typically the unit or department isn't involved in any of that activity. We really like to keep you separate of that, so that way we don't burden you with unnecessary emails or contacts during that time. We feel that pretty typical for most organizations to have that 90-day window from when the invoice is created. More often than not, it's just that the sponsor needs another invoice being sent to them, or they're working internally to get a PO created to release payment, just normal, typical accounts receivable things that delay the payment in that regard. Anything over 90 days, however, if we've been unable to contact that sponsor, we are CCing whomever the SAPOC is in all of our communication just to keep them aware. Again, it's not necessarily anything that we're too concerned about, but we just want to make sure that we're keeping you informed of all of our collection activity as well. And then anything 121 days and older is now also potentially including the PI, depending on what conversations we're having with the SAPOC or what progress we've made with the sponsor and just understanding what's wrong with that payment. Anything over 150 days is escalated within sponsor programs too. We do have reporting that we report out on, like I had mentioned before, of our receivables that are greater than $20,000 and older than 150 days. So that just makes sure that all of our stakeholders are well aware of anything that's happening with an accounts receivable. And it also allows for additional conversations outside of accounts receivable if somebody knows somebody in an organization that might help release payment and help with our collections activities. So unit responsibilities. So James is going to go over, like I said, in much greater detail in a moment, but there are two different ways in pathways that you are able to monitor your financials. There's the item activity summary. So this allows you to actually look at each invoice individually, and you can see all activities happening within that invoice. So you'd be able to see if there were any adjustments made, or if there was a payment applied, or if they were all outstanding and currently open. And then there's the ARB reports and M pathways. So there's 3 separate reports that you can also view that James will go over that give you a better understanding of your receivables and where you're at within those. And this is just a little more detail that James will be going over of what they are and what they do. One item that we do, again, want to note, though, again, when you're reviewing any of your reports and you're seeing that BI journal entry that's giving your department revenue, we just want to always add that disclaimer that that does not indicate that a payment has been applied. So it's really important to not just assume that that revenue line is an actual payment and that you are monitoring through these to actually see the payment applied to that outstanding invoice. So another question that we frequently get at is, what do I do if I receive a payment? We don't get this as much now that everybody's working remotely and not actually in the office, but a lot of people do still receive physical checks, and often some of our sponsors just send them to the address of the last person that they were in contact with. So we wanted to include the information and just really kind of differentiate between the 2 different processes. So for the first one, if there is no AR invoice, and an AR invoice starts with a 1 if it's a sponsored billing, and it starts with a 6 if it's a general billing. If there's no AR invoice identified on that payment or any of the supporting documentation, we ask that you actually deposit that per our internal control guidelines to the account in the check field listed here, which is actually our unallocated account. So once that check is deposited into this account, the services team will actively work to research that and try to identify the appropriate location. And then for checks that you receive that actually have an AR invoice indicated on them, we just ask that you actually apply those to our accounts receivable SOA, where a collector monitors that daily and will actually take that payment and apply it to the appropriate invoice within the AR ledger. And so if you find a missing payment on the unallocated, if you're monitoring that list regularly, it is a self-join group, which I'll give the details in a moment, if you'd like to receive that report. If you find a payment that you believe to be yours, there are a few things that are needed for you or from you when you submit the ticket. And it's just a list of things here, so that way we can identify that the payment is yours. Once we receive that request of you identifying the payment, the AR services team then will create a journal entry to the department or to the chart fields, the discretionary chart fields of your choice to make sure that we get you that payment timely. And then here is the actual list. If you click on this, make sure you all get a copy of the slides once this has finished. But I strongly encourage you to click on the unallocated payment list just to monitor all payments out there. You'd be surprised how many payments we actually do get that have 0 to no identification of where they should be applied. So we really appreciate your partnership in just identifying any of those payments that we're just a little unsure of where they go. Okay, and with that being said, I'm going to turn it back over to James to go into a little more detail about systems that you can use to monitor your receivables.
Sorry, we have 3 different systems that we use that we have available for the departments to track their invoices and track their receivables. So the first one is Perceptive Content. This is our document imaging system where you can see invoices. We have M reports, which most of you should be familiar with. Here we can monitor the age receivables and just see the total amount of revenue that is outstanding. And then we also have M pathways, which has a bit more detailed information, and we'll go over some of the systems in there and what some of the information in there means, because it can be a little bit confusing. So Perceptive Content, like I said, is our document imaging system. Here you can see the actual invoice that is sent to the sponsor along with any supporting documentation. So the easiest way to navigate to the information you would want is after you log in, you'll come up with this little bar and you'll click on Documents. Once you click on Documents, on the left side of that new page will be a drop-down menu. In that drop-down menu, you want to click Accounts Receivable, and then you want to click Project Grant Number Search. From there, you can enter in your PG number, and you'll get a list of all of the invoices that have been generated for that PG number, and then you just find whichever invoice you're looking for. You can click in there, see the invoice, see the supporting documentation, and know what exactly has been sent. The next system is M Reports. Here we're looking at the project grant budget status activity. So you navigate to this, you enter in your PG number and click search. And at the bottom of that, you'll see a little funding source box. At the bottom there, you'll be able to see your outstanding invoices and receivables, the total amount, and you can click into that dollar amount button and you see each individual invoice that is outstanding. The last system is a little bit more technical. This is in Pathways. This is the item activity summary. To reach the item activity summary, you can go to the financials homepage and there's a tile there called item activity summary. You can also go to the top right corner and click on the little looking glass icon and that'll bring up a search bar. And in that search bar, if you type in item activity summary, it'll be the only link that pops up. So it's very easy to find. Once you're in this system, there are a couple of different fields you can fill out. So the first field you have to fill out, this is always required, is business unit. It's automatically populated with UMISH, but that doesn't actually work for our purposes. So you'll need to know, am I looking at a federal project or a non-federal project? If you're looking at a federal project, in the business unit box, type SP Fed in all caps. If you're looking at a non-federal project, type SP Non in all caps. That has to be entered or you're not going to get any information returned. The next two boxes are customer ID and item ID. So the customer ID is if you're looking for all of the invoices related to a parent PG. So you will type in your parent PG number along with SP Fed or SP Non. And then at the bottom, when you click search, you'll get a list of every single invoice that has been generated on that project. You can also search by individual item ID invoice number. So if you know the invoice number that you're looking for, you can go into item ID, type in the invoice number, and it'll just generate one link to that individual invoice number. When you click into an individual invoice, this is the screen that you'll see. So you'll see the PG number, the item ID, and you'll see the status. The status is usually the most important bit. Is it open? If it's open, it's not paid. That invoice is outstanding. If it's closed, that either means the invoice has been paid or the invoice has been written off. And then you'll see entry types here in the bottom. So the entry types will always be, start with the IN entry type. So IN means we submitted the invoice. You can see the reason we submitted the invoice. Is it a final? Is it a regular, quarterly, monthly invoice? You'll see the accounting date. That's the date that we sent the invoice. You'll see the balance is the amount of the invoice. Currency will always be USD. And the date posted will be the date that the journal entry posted to your project, the date that you see that BI journal entry. You also have a view documents button, which will take you to the invoice. And then there's a couple of different entry types that can follow IN. So the most common you'll see is PY. PY means the invoice has been paid. You can see the accounting date, which is the date that we received the payment, the amount of the payment that we received. Usually this should be the same amount. Sometimes it's not always the same amount. If it's not, please reach out to sponsored programs or SSC. They can give you more information about that. And the date that it posted. This is not something you will see on your project. This is an internal posting date that just generates cash lines that clear the receivable. You might also see ADJ as an entry type. This is usually a credit memo where we're canceling or adjusting the invoice up or down. We're writing off the invoice, and that's on the department's end. And then there's also a couple of different entry types that aren't listed here that are much rarer. And if you see those, please reach out to either sponsored programs or accounts receivable, and they can help you understand what those entry types are. And with that, I will send it over to Christy to close things out.
Okay, thank you, James. We have 2 slides here left that are just in review who does what, and it's a nice little chart that discusses the process and who's responsible. So if you come across something and you have a question, these are the groups that are involved. So a project award notification is issued that involves ORSP, and then they send it to us in ERPM in sponsor programs. A project or a grant is created and billing rows need to be established. That involves sponsor programs and the finance, accounting, customer service group who enters and adds all the rows and pathways. But sponsor programs is the one that decides what needs to be billed and how. And then customer setups, when we get a brand new project and we need to set up that customer, it comes from ORSP because the award comes from them. It goes to sponsor programs, and sometimes it involves the department or the unit if it's maybe a fixed price project. But usually it would be sponsor programs that then sends it to SSC to make sure that it's billed correctly. And then the next chart, award modification. So anything additional budget, if we have a change in PO, invoicing changes, anything like that. Typically the change comes from ORSP because there's something from the sponsor telling us to make that change. Sometimes it goes directly to SSC and they reach out to us and make sure that it's okay to make that change. Sometimes the department's notified of it, but ultimately we need to make sure it gets to SSC and that it's in accordance with the agreement in the sponsor's contract and it's okay to make that change and we have it all documented, and then SSC makes the change. For invoices to be generated, it's the responsibility of Glint system for the most part in the SSAR billing team and with the help of ITS. And then collection activity that begins at 30 days past the due date, that is Stacy and SSC AR collections.
So if people are interested, I can do a little demonstration of how to get to the item activity summary, since it might be something that not everybody has seen before. I can go ahead and share my screen on that one. Let me just log in real quick. What many of you will see is some version of this homepage when you log into mPathways. So what you can do at the top is where mine says sponsored programs, you can go down here to financials homepage. Most of you should have access to this. And here you can see the item activity tile. You can click that to get to the item activity summary, or you can go up here and click this little search box and type in item activity summary. Hit search. And it's the only line item that's going to come up.